So the origins of Christianity, one of the central historical questions we have yet to address in our response to Ehrman, our authors say, is how this tiny offshoot of Judaism, which subsequently went on to change the world, originated. Right? If it was dreamt up on a idea of some dude who died, who tried to do the right thing, but was ultimately murdered by the state because of some crafty people, or maybe that didn't happen. Maybe he's just an idea, okay, well, you see that in history in other ways, and skeptics like to point to the fact that, there's all these Jesuses running around, all these end times messianic people who wanted to throw off the shackles of Rome. We have no clue about them. We don't know their followers. We don't know their teachings. We don't know their tenets other than being anti-Roman, and we know so much about Jesus. Why did they win over everything? Right. And so much so that once you kill its leader, it didn't go away. In fact, the opposite seems to happen, is that the leader came back. And so our authors have a really good a breakdown here of the origin of Christianity and the weirdness surrounding it. So Ehrman writes about what happened after Jesus' death. He says this, but then something else happened. Some of them began to say that God had intervened and brought him back from the dead. The story caught on, and some, or all, we don't know, of his closest followers came to think that, in fact, he had been raised from the dead. And so, so they're just crazy, they're just mistaken, or they wanted to grab power, and they seem to have done it.
Yeah. Well, something happened, though, right, to do this, right? And we're not exactly sure.
They just got in their head.
Yeah.
We really liked following this guy around, claiming to perform miracles. It was a lot of responsibility. We've gotten a lot of boats and did things and arguments. I just want to go back to fishing, but maybe we can fleece the people out of some more money or talking to slaves who have none. But okay.
That's right. So while Ehrman accepts that the disciples came to believe that Jesus was resurrected, and our authors point out in his most recent book, How Jesus Became God, he seeks to explain away the empty tomb by arguing that there was no known tomb to begin with. There wasn't a tomb, is what he says, right? But, is this really historically credible? Right? There wasn't a tomb? Right?
Probably not.
Right. So he attempts to defend this claim by pointing out that neither Joseph of Arimathea, the man who placed Jesus in the tomb according to the Gospels, nor the tomb itself was ever mentioned in the earliest creed, right? Which would be 1 Corinthians 15,
right?
Verses 5 through 3.
Right, and that's a big thing. Even Gary Habermas points to that and says even skeptical scholars view that as a creedal creed. And so much so that it might even originate, I think he said something like 6 months after the resurrection event. Right. And so that's coming from the people that he's talking to. So yet, 1 Corinthians 15:4 does say he was buried.
Oh. So
buried what?
In the air, not a tomb.
Right. So what did Paul think Jesus was buried in, or on, or under, or around?
Yeah.
It only leaves you so many options there. Moreover, since Paul follows he was buried in the same verse with the affirmation he was raised, the obvious historical conclusion is that whatever Jesus was buried in, presumably a tomb, was now empty, or he was raised somehow.
Yeah.
What is more, the mere lack of a specific reference to Joseph of Arimathea must not be construed to imply that Paul and the Creed deny the event happened. Right. Creeds are meant to be condensed expressions of faith, not exhaustive and detailed historical accounts. The thing's only 2 verses long, and they're not the longest version. It's not like Psalm 119.
He left out this detail, right?
Right.
He doesn't talk about how Jesus was not speared in the side. He doesn't talk about all kinds of things. Well, it's just a creed, right? And it's just a summary. It's a condensed expression of the faith.
Doesn't that assume that the people who are creeding are know what he's talking about, reference it, and maybe even there's a gospel present that one of his companions has written, so he could just be like, well, there you go. If you want to know more, see the attachment. Right. Gospel of Luke.
So Joseph of Arimathea isn't mentioned in this creed, and therefore we know that Jesus wasn't buried in a tomb.
This,
right?
this poor rich man who gave up his spot, a tomb that no one else was buried in, and he's lost in this creed of 2 verses. He must feel slighted.
That's right. Also, Ehrman argues that Roman policy didn't allow the crucified body to be buried. Right? That was part of their policy. And there's our authors tell us that there is some truth to this in certain contexts, but because Ehrman hasn't provided the reader with all the historical evidence, he ends up in concealing more than he reveals, right? So yes, to a certain extent, that is the case, that, they didn't allow crucified criminals, right, to be buried. But if this were the normal way the Romans treated the Jews in and around Jerusalem, why did the Romans and the Jews not simply reply to the Christian claim that there was an empty tomb on these terms? Of course there's nobody in the tomb because he was never allowed to be buried. So boom, end of story, right? Not he's risen, no, or not, well, somebody stole the body. No,
Something.
He was never buried. That would have been the end of it, right? Right? That would have been the proper response to claim of a resurrection in an empty tomb.
Right. So Craig Evans, who's a well-known scholar, demonstrates, with reference to Philo and Josephus, among various other sources, that in peacetime Jerusalem, relative peacetime, and just outside its walls, with its unique political and social situation, right? I mean, we see that throughout history. We see it in the Gospels. I mean, the fact that Pilate was releasing known criminals at a certain point in Passover, and the very fact that he killed Jesus or whipped him when he's like, I don't find fault with this, I wash my hands of it, but if you want it done, like, it's on you. Boom. I mean, doesn't that signify some speciality there at that time with
regard to their relationship with the Jews and how they treated them and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So the Roman administration seems to have normally respected Jewish burial customs for the executed. It's one of the reasons why the Jews have to take Jesus to the Romans, because that's pretty much what they wouldn't allow the Romans to do. Yeah, you can have your own temple guards and the
Jews. Yeah, they wouldn't allow the Jews to do. Yeah.
Right. So the Jewish leaders could hit people with stones for all that sorts of stuff, and they just couldn't carry out capital punishment, which is purveyed by Caesar himself. So to cite an example from Evans, its quote is this: the Jewish historian and apologist Josephus adds that Roman procurators who succeeded Agrippa by abstaining from the interference with the customs of the country kept the national peace. This is from Jewish Wars. And then customs that included never leaving a corpse unburied against Appian there.
Right, so they just kind of followed the Jewish custom that allowed them to do their deal with regard to these executed people, and because they didn't want to, upset the apple cart, as it were. Right. There was some relative peace, kind of, right? And so why stir it up, right? This kind of activity.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why Pilate was taken out, was because he let this Jewish situation
get out of hand.
Yeah. And so, and we see Joseph of Arimathea and probably Nicodemus going before Pilate and asking to take the body, especially at the time that it occurred, so that they can go wash and be part of Passover and et cetera, because they're touching a dead body and being unclean. So all these things are evidences for this burial, and so this is what they're doing here. So had the Roman governors in Israel, especially in the vicinity of Jerusalem itself, regularly crucified Jesus and left their bodies hanging on the cross, it is unlikely they would have kept the nation at peace,
right?
Because of all the things surrounding man's cursed who hangs upon the tree. So there's a long history within the Jewish mindset of why that would be wrong, especially at the time it was occurring as well.
Right, good. And finally, with regard to this issue of crucifixion and burial and that sort of thing, the archaeological evidence, which Ehrman fails to include, supports the contention that in Palestine, the Romans often allowed for the crucified to be buried, right? For instance, in a survey of the archaeological evidence, Evans cites how certain human remains, which had been given proper burial around Jesus' time, shows signs of Roman execution, right? So you could tell if the body had been, crucified by what it looked like, right?
Pretty holy.
Yeah. or at least the bones, right? So he also notes the dozens of, or even perhaps more than 100 nails that had been found in tombs and ossuaries, right? So some of these nails included traces of human calcium, indicating that they're likely used in crucifixion, right? So why would you put nails in a tomb with
box,
the body? Yeah. Well, those were part of the. I don't know.
Yeah. Casting nails before. I don't know. Yeah.